Hello, today's video will concentrate on persuasive writing and imagine an exam question like this. War is a necessary evil. Write a speech to deliver to the Houses of Parliament based on your reaction to this statement. So I'm going to take you through an answer that our teacher scored at 28 out of 40. But I'm not going to use the mark scheme. You can get lost in that. I'm going to try and show you what makes this writing good and how it can be improved, and then you would compare this to your own writing to see how yours could be better. I cover a lot of skills in the persuasive writing in my guide. It's going to flick through here to this mnemonic that I use, Mad Father's Crotch, rhetorical techniques. Let's just click on that and see what we find. And so here I'm going to keep coming back to these techniques that the writer has used. But I'm also going to focus on one really useful technique for any writing you're doing. And it's probable that your teacher hasn't dealt with this technique fully with you. And it's the power of the verbs that you choose. Okay, well, let's leap straight into this answer. The ultimatum that is present with this statement, Mr. Speaker, is horrible. So automatically you've got a sophisticated device here. Most writers would begin with Mr. Speaker, the ultimatum, blah, blah, blah. Withholding that until later is more sophisticated. It forces you to use these commas in parenthesis here as you add the information in. And it also focuses you on the issue, the ultimatum, that war is necessary. We have a powerful emotive use of language here, although it could be better. So horrible is a slightly childish word. Indefensible would be more formal. On one hand, and there's a the missing here, if we join the combat in places like Syria or against groups like Islamic State, ISIS, we are working for the greater good. So here we have good use of alliteration, again in we are working, and this verb here, working, is inclusive. It suggests that going to war is not destructive, it's a job, it's something that empowers us. And this writer also reads well. They follow the news and are using real-life examples. Now that can't fail to persuade an examiner that you're choosing examples and facts that exactly match the topic at hand. You can't get away in this paper without being well read and well versed in the news. If you don't read the news, The Guardian is mostly free online. Get the Guardian app and get reading. On the other hand, however, if we choose not to help, we are insensitive and leaving innocent people vulnerable. Look how well this writer is now using very formal emotive language. Vulnerable, innocent, insensitive, and that's also a triplet, a rule of three. And these adjectives are really powerful because they are so formal and because they are so emotive at the same time. Now, setting up an argument like this, where you have on the one hand one idea and on the other hand another, is what I teach my students as contrasting pairs. So you contrast one thing with another. Now, a further trick that this writer might not have mastered yet is that the argument you prefer, you put second, because the second place is more powerful. You'll often spot this if you listen to your teacher's questions and they give you the wrong option first and the right option second, and then of course you give them the answer that came second and they think you knew, but actually no, unconsciously you just plumped for the second one because that's where they put the emphasis. And that's a trick that you can also use in the structure of your paragraphs. Now, although the language is very formal, this writer has got however, which means the same as on the other hand, and so that's redundant, and that stops the writer getting closer to the 40, even though it's formal. You just don't need it, it feels a bit clumsy. Then we have the rhetorical question. One question sticks in our mind, what can we do? But now look at the verb again, how powerful this is. A weaker writer would simply say, we ask one question, what can we do? But ask is a neutral verb, sticks in our minds is again violent, but not necessarily in an aggressive way. This is a positive use of violence, and that's quite subtle because the writer might be about to suggest the positive use of violence in war. It should go without saying that when this writer introduces a new topic, they paragraph, but you'd be amazed at how often students forget to paragraph in an exam. It has become increasingly clear that peace talks are simply not enough. We waste time by talking when we could be acting. So again, you have that contrasting pair. We waste time by talking, contrasted to when we could be acting. And look at the alliteration on we waste when we, and of course the repetition, the anaphora, if you like, of we and we. So this writer is thinking really carefully about the structure of each sentence. The exclamation here, exclamation mark, works. Now again, the choice of verb is really interesting because what this person means is fighting or killing. That's what we could be doing in a war. But now the writer uses verbs which are powerful in the opposite way. So the verbs no longer sound destructive, because if they sound destructive, we might reject them. And so just like the use of working that we had earlier, which was here, we now have the use of acting. And that's to make the actions more acceptable. By involving ourselves in conflicts like that of Syria, we will be entering the harsh rule of fear and creating a better tomorrow for the next generation. So let's unpick that a little bit. Instead of fighting, we are now involving ourselves. Again, a powerful use of the verb that suggests we are doing good. This is something that people do when they help each other. And so it's presenting war as a helpful act. We involve ourselves not in war and killing, but the more formal conflicts. Well, an argument in the playground is just a conflict. So again, this writer is cunningly playing down the impact of war using very precise vocabulary. Again, we have this trick of putting an example in the middle of the sentence, which is then separated by parenthesis. The commas in parenthesis were up here as well, remember? And so the writer is showing real control of punctuation. We will be entering the harsh rule of fear. Again, we have a powerful adjective here. A rule of fear is a metaphor. So fear doesn't actually rule. Governments do. But this government that we're attacking is being likened to fear. And then we've got that contrasting pair again. So in contrast to the rule of fear, we have a better tomorrow for the next generation. And a better tomorrow is again, if you like, a metaphor. Instead of saying a future, this writer has chosen to say the future is tomorrow. It's immediate, which means that by entering into war, we will be bringing that future to the present. It's right around the corner. It's just tomorrow. Again, a very subtle use of vocabulary. In terms of punctuation, this comma is actually separating two sentences. So that's called the comma splice. It's a weakness. If you're going to join two sentences, you should use the semicolon. You will notice all the way through here the use of direct address with we. An obvious technique if you want to get the reader on your side. You just pretend that they are. We believe it is clear that terrorists only respond to force, and by sending our bombs to annihilate the threats in Syria, we could end terrorism completely. So here, the writer has decided to have a really powerful and destructive verb. And we might react against that. If we're suddenly annihilating people, we might vote against it. But look what else this writer does. Instead of people, we're going to annihilate threats. So the violence is aimed at things which are wrong. It's not directly aimed at people. Of course, we know that the threats are terrorists who are people who will be killed. But the subtle use of language distances us from that. So we could end terrorism completely. So this is an example of hyperbole, over-exaggeration for effect, but the writer is offering a solution which is long-term, and that's something that weaker writers don't do. But because this writer is thinking ambitiously, they give an effect which won't be immediate. It's going to be long-lasting, far into the future, and that's a neat trick if you're trying to be persuasive. Again, if we go back to the punctuation, I told you that the semicolon separates two sentences. This is no longer a sentence because the writer has introduced the word and so that's very slightly clumsy. To keep that semicolon, get rid of the word and. Again, the use of the exclamation mark works here, although it does start to feel slightly like the writing of a teenager. So I would strongly advise you to only ever use one exclamation mark in the whole piece of writing. It just makes your writing feel more expert. Now, this rhetorical question is packed with techniques. So it's a rhetorical question. Are we adding fuel to the fire? Alliteration, and that also is a metaphor. And good writers do that. They have much more than one technique in the same sentence. It's a slight cliche, adding fuel to the fire, but it does work perfectly with the idea of bombing and war. So this doesn't count against them. It's a cliche that works. Giving people like ISIS the attention they want, another rhetorical question. There's a bit of a weakness here. By calling ISIS people, we're now no longer opposed to them. We're more sympathetic towards them. And you can see with the structure of these paragraphs that this writer is moving towards wanting to promote war in order to get rid of terrorism. And this goes against that point of view. So it's a weakness. Mr. Speaker, by sending our bombs to join those raining down on Syria, are we not just killing civilians for them? Are we not just more destructive and are we not just causing more destruction and pain for those there? So we've got a slight problem here in that the writer now appears to be arguing against war when earlier we were getting the strong impression that the writer favoured it. So there's a kind of looseness in the structure here. When you're arguing, you can't afford to argue from one side to the other without signalling to the reader which side you favour. And as I've said, one way to signal it is to put the argument that you agree with second. But if you disagree with this argument, which this writer might do, it's really useful to signal that to the reader, for example, by saying, some people argue, and by implication, therefore, if you say some people argue, it means not you. So that would help this confusion that I'm having in deciding which way this writer is going. Okay, are we and are we? So we've got repetition here, which is effective, it's powerful. Emotive language again, destruction and pain. But the verb causing isn't powerful enough. So are we not destroying and inflicting pain is much more powerful as a use of verbs. Not only are we killing more innocent people than Islamic State, again, killing is emotive, but slaughtering is much more powerful, isn't it? Executing. So think about the power of your verbs. We are endangering ourselves and making us a target. Again, we have that contrasting pair again. So on the one hand we're killing, but on the other hand we're making a target of ourselves. What if the next attack is in London, not Paris or Brussels? And this use of a sentence with no verb, so it's called a curtailed sentence, is very powerful. It brings the reader up short, and it makes them think, oh yes, it's not just Europe, this could happen here in our country. What if we create a war on the level of World War I or II? How many young British lives will be lost? So here we've got some over-exaggeration here, and this is where this student's general knowledge is slightly weak, because to leap from us entering into a conflict with Syria just to kill ISIS is a massive leap to go from that to World War I or II. You could make that leap, but you'd have to show the steps, for example, involving the superpowers of America and Russia. So you could make that argument, but this writer hasn't, so this feels slightly flimsy. The other problem is we've got the comma splice here again. What if we create a war on the level of World War I or II? Question mark, it's the end of a question. How many young British lives will be lost? Yeah, so you can see that the examiner's starting to mark you down here for being imprecise. Fathers, sons, mothers and daughters. So it's more powerful as a triplet normally, although here we could argue that we've got the contrasting pairs, fathers and sons, balanced against mothers and daughters. It's slightly clumsy though, because it's separated by semicolons. You use semicolons in a list where you're separating longer items. So mothers and daughters could just about be separated by a semicolon, but sons and fathers couldn't. How many must pay the price of our actions? Again, we have a powerful metaphor here with alliteration. Pay the price, many must, lots of powerful alliteration here, of our actions, before we realize that involving ourselves in these conflicts creates more harm than good. So again, alliteration with conflicts creates. We have a contrasting pair again, creating harm rather than doing something positive. But again, we've got the most powerful argument last, which is we shouldn't fight, whereas the most powerful argument here was we should fight, and that's the most compelling reason why this writer doesn't get a higher mark out of 40. Okay, well, let's finish up by just having a look at these rhetorical devices. So the writer used metaphor and alliteration and direct address, some facts about Syria and ISIS. We didn't really have an anecdote, a little story. We just about had a triplet. We had over-exaggeration, hyperbole, lots of emotive language, many rhetorical questions. We didn't really have any statistics. Contrasting pairs was a feature. Repetition was there. The whole piece was filled with opinion. It wasn't coherently able to create an enemy because we weren't sure which side was the enemy, and that was its principal downfall, and there was no humour. So you can see that of these 15 techniques, the writer has mastered about 12 of them. And so a really obvious way to improve is to practice including all of those. Now finally, this is an extract from an exam answer that a student did, and they wrote 278 words on one page. In another later video I may make on a lower mark, 21 out of 40, you can see that the student only got 267 words on one page. And now, although that might sound stupid, it does suggest that students with smaller handwriting actually persuade the examiner to give them higher marks. That's something for you to bear in mind. Okay, so your next step is to write an answer to this question yourself, then compare it to the skills in this, and to my later video where I will look at an answer that's not 28 but 35. So good luck in your exam practice. If you'd like further videos, don't forget to subscribe, and if you'd like to know more, don't forget to buy my guide. It's beautiful, full of the most wonderful jokes. I'm sure you read that while I was trying to teach you. Goodbye.